Surgeon, a surgeon some are calling a sociopath, and they are telling stories of botched operations that left them with agonizing pain. Now that surgeon has just been indicted for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. What was that deadly weapon? His surgical tools.
Hey everyone, welcome to Kito and Krime. Today, after 2 weeks of researching the case and watching season 1 of the docuseries, I am ready to talk about Peacock's Dr. Death. Based on Wonders, a podcast of the same name, focusing on season 1, featuring Dr. Christopher Duntsch. Who was a butcher, if anything. And we're going to talk about a little bit about his background, about the real case, and then I'm going to get into a review of season 1 of the docuseries. I got sucked into season 2 as well, but that is an entirely different doctor. So once I finish watching that and do another deep dive on that doctor, I'll be back with a review and a talk about that doctor as well. But for now, we're going to dive into Dr. Christopher Duntsch.
Monster.
Drug addict, a psychopath,
Killer. And they're
In the annals of modern medicine, there are stories that defy belief, and this is one of them. The line got drawn here between healer and complete, utter, psychotic villain. It's the story of Dr. Christopher Duntsch, a surgeon whose name is synonymous with tragedy and betrayal of his patients' trust, as well as all of humanity, his Hippocratic oath, everything that you can imagine. He maimed and killed without so much as an inch of remorse, while always clinging to the idea that he was a great surgeon.
Dr. Christopher Duntsch calls himself the best neurosurgeon in all of Dallas. He specializes in relieving back and neck pain.
Then they come back to me to discuss surgical options.
So, and yet, because of the way the medical system is often drawn up, the way insurance companies act, the way medical doctors' registries act, he was able to carry on for years, jumping from hospital to hospital, clinic to clinic, while still doing the same kind of damage to multiple patients. We saw this when we covered the case of the killer nurse, which one of the killer nurses, right up there, where the hospitals and medical systems' fear of a lawsuit or fear of censure was greater than their duty to the patient. So this is another case of that. And so with that being said, let's talk about him. Dr. Christopher Duntsch was born in Montana on April 3rd. I share a birthday with this asshole. 1971, though his father, who was Donald, who was a Christian missionary and a physical therapist, I believe he had a PhD in physical therapy, and his mother, Susan, who was a school teacher, they actually relocated Christopher and his 2 brothers to Memphis, Tennessee, and that is where he grew up. He grew up in the wealthy suburbs of Memphis, and he also had a sister as well. He went to a private Christian school in the Cordova suburb, and he was a star football player for that team. And his initial goal was to make it to the NFL. He really wanted to play professional football, and I wish that is what he was able to do. It would have saved a whole lot of trouble and a whole lot of tragedy for a whole lot of families. When he graduated from Evangelical Christian School, he attended Millsaps College, where he was recruited to play Division III college football. Now, we all know the big boys: Alabama, Auburn, Notre Dame. Those are Division I, and then there's a Division I AA, which is just a step below that. Then there's Division II, which is a step below that, and then there is a Division III, which is still a step below that. So he made it to a Division III school, and there's some fine Division III schools out there. Don't knock it just because it's not, big time football. It's the difference between the USFL and the NFL. Still great football, just one has more notoriety than the other. And he did well there. He was a running back, and then in a defensive back, he did really well, but he used up all of his eligibility there. He concentrated more on his football than his studies because he really wanted to be a professional football player. And when he was going to basically lose his eligibility, he initiated a loophole in the NCAA's rule book where he could transfer and basically start his eligibility over to a certain extent by starting to a different school. So he actually transferred to Colorado State, the Rams, which is a Division I school. It's a big school. It's one of the two big teams in Colorado. He transferred there and tried out as a walk-on for their football team and made it. Though he wasn't a starter, he was kind of like the practice team, second string, third string, but he made it, and he devoted his entire time there to trying to make it to the starting roster and then eventually to get drafted. And he spent 2 years there of also studying science. He was uniquely gifted in the area of science and especially research, which is going to play into this story. But he actually did quite well in his studies at Colorado State, but his football eligibility ran out. Former teammates have said that he had a lot of drive but didn't have a whole lot of talent. And you'll find his ability to recognize when he doesn't have talent for something. There was something off about his visual acuity. Not that he had bad vision, but there was something missing between what he was supposed to do and what he tried to do and what he thought he was doing, if that makes sense. Like, for example, the coach said that he would tell him a play, he would demonstrate a play, you have to run through the line here between these two backs. And he would go over here instead of here, but swear that he went there where he was supposed to do. So there was some disconnect there. I don't know. It's never come out that he had any kind of true disability. I think maybe, I don't know. I wish I could tell you what I think, but it was kind of that kind of thing. And you'll see that play into his surgeries as well later on, tragically. So he decided that he would just go back home to Memphis, where he went to Memphis State, and decided he wanted to pursue medicine. And he enrolled in pre-med courses at Memphis State. Took him about 2 years. And then he did well on the MCATs, scored in like the 90th percentile, and eventually transferred to the University of Tennessee Health Science Center to pursue a joint MD, PhD, I believe, in microbiology. And he had a rather average medical school record. He did graduate, and then when he went on to his residency at the Sims Murphy spinal clinic in Memphis, he did okay. I mean, he was moderately talented. With more training, I think he could have become really talented, but unfortunately, that's not the way this went. He was really into the PhD side of his program. He loved research, and while he was at the spinal clinic, he ran their donor bank, which he was able to do a lot of his research on spinal replacement, stem cell research for the regeneration of the spine, which also ironically kind of plays into the second season of Dr. Death, an entirely different doctor. Stem cells, as great as they are, have, it appears, been the basis of a lot of faulty hopes. But anyway, so he ran the donor bank where he, had access to millions of dollars in budget. He had the eyes and ears of the higher ups of the doctors at his residency. And so he was able to fly under the radar, concentrating heavily on research towards stem cell regeneration of the spine, because he was studying neurosurgery. So he really concentrated on that. He had a number of patents and also had a couple of biotech startups, which would come out later that he stole some of the research. But he was concentrating heavily on that. In fact, some of the doctors at both the University of Tennessee and at the spinal clinic where he did his residency were investors in some of his early startups. And so there's another, sweeping bad behavior under the rug, because while most neurosurgeons would do about 1,000 surgeries during their 4 years of residency, he only did 100. So that's a tenth of the training he was supposed to have, because he was spending so much time on research, and the doctors were allowing it to happen. I don't know why. And he was also heavily under the influence of cocaine and alcohol. In fact, they sent him to rehab at one point while he was at the University of Tennessee Medical School, which that happens to a lot of medical students, a lot of doctors, because it's a highly stressful field. They sobered him up, they got him back to work, and eventually he did complete his residency. He looked great on paper. He had all these patents, all this research under his name, as well as an MD, PhD, and a residency sign off as well. While living in Memphis, he and his high school buddy Jerry Sumners played a huge role in going from strip club to strip club. And it is one of these strip clubs where they were in there drinking, having cocaine, everything that, you would do if you had endless amounts of money, it seems. He met a stripper by the name of Wendy Young and had a one-night stand with her. She became pregnant, and he ended up living with her in Memphis. About that time, he had finished his residency and decided it was time to look for a job. So he sent out this beautiful CV full of all this research, impeccable credentials, played Division I football, all this stuff. And he received offers from California, from New York, and from Dallas. Now, Wendy was from Dallas, and so she was really urging him to take that offer with Baylor University, the Plano Hospital in Plano, Texas. And they were offering him a salary of $650,000 a year to come in and be a innovative neurosurgeon. They were offering to sort of back him in a clinic of his own as well, connected with Baylor. So he took the job, and he, Jerry, and Wendy moved there in 2010. And he started working at Baylor, where he made the acquaintance of a vascular surgeon, Dr. Randall Kirby, who opened for him on a couple of his spinal surgeries. Basically, a vascular surgeon would come in, or a general surgeon would come in, and basically cut through the flesh, remove all the veins and arteries and other things out of the way, so that the neurosurgeon, can get to the spine, which is where they're going to operate. So he made a bad impression on Dr. Kirby, who was went to medical school at Baylor and, had a great reputation. He also made a poor impression on a lot of his other crew, the nurses, the anesthesiologists, everybody. Kind of had a bad reputation, as according to Dr. Kirby, he should not be allowed to wield a scalpel.
After the surgery began, I started getting the impression that Dr. Duntsch didn't really know what he was doing. Everyone involved in that case, from the scrub techs to the x-ray tech to myself to the anesthesiologist, gave each other looks many times during that case, because we just didn't understand what he was doing.
But let's talk about some of the patients that he worked on during his tenure at Baylor. Kenneth Farrell was one of his first patients. He came in for a basic fusion of a disc in his spine, basically removing a ruptured disc and placing a cage or a metal spacer in there to kind of take up the space. Is one of the simplest surgeries, according to everything that I've read, that a neurosurgeon can do. I mean, we're not talking like, Dr. McDreamy on Gray's doing, right in the brain. We're talking about most neurosurgeons work on the spine. Well, the stuff you see on Gray's is, very fictionalized, but it's like the simplest thing. Basically, Dr. Kirby was once quoted as saying he's not even a neurosurgeon and he could have done it. Basically, you cut it open, the bulging disc is there, and it just pops right out with the use of a scalpel. It's kind of like a pimple. It just pops out, and you take this cage that's going to fill that space and you put it on the midline and you place it and then you close up. That's pretty much the operation. Well, he botched it badly. He damaged the spinal cord, he damaged some nerves, all while the nurses and other people in the OR trying to tell him to stop. But he had the delusion that he was doing it correctly. Like going back to the plays that his college football coach talked about, how he said he did it correctly when it's clear he didn't. That's still hanging around. And so Mr. Fennell, who came to him with debilitating back pain that was still manageable, walked out of there with his entire ability to walk for more than 30 feet or stand for more than a few minutes gone. He came out of there in a wheelchair and just kind of swept under the rugs. Mr. Lee Passmore, again, Dr. Duntsch, basically the same kind of operation, ended up severing a ligament, which left him with chronic pain. He also messed up the placement of the cage, like it was off midline, like it wasn't doing its job. And he kept trying to attach, instead of attaching it to the spine, the backbone, like you're supposed to do, he was trying to attach it to the soft muscle tissue, like attaching it to your back muscle, which is soft tissue. It's kind of like, I heard one podcast say that it was kind of like putting a screw in a can of tuna fish. It's not going to hold. And so he spent hours with this man under anesthesia trying to attach this basket into soft tissue instead of onto the actual backbone where it's supposed to go. And so as a result, Mr. Passmore, with debilitating pain, numbness, some paralyzation, the fact that him trying to place the screw incorrectly over and over caused such an amount of bleeding, and the fact that he damaged some of the muscle tissue around the spine, even if they had tried to go in and fix what he had done, it might have caused the patient to bleed out. The opening vascular surgeon on that surgery, Dr. Mark Hull, said it was one of the worst things he'd ever seen, and he was begging him to stop. But I asked my mother-in-law, who is a medical professional. She was an RN and a charge nurse for many years, and also was a nurse that investigated doctor complaints in the OR. She would sit in the OR gallery and she would watch a surgery. If she saw anything wrong, she had the ability to make a report or stop it. And so I asked her, why did this allow to go on? And she said there's kind of an unwritten rule with surgeons that surgeons are elevated to kind of a god level at most hospitals. And so to get one in trouble is very hard. And often you run the risk, especially if you're a paraprofessional like a nurse or a nurse and anesthetist or, a surgical tech, trying to tell him, don't do that, that's wrong, you can get yourself fired. And also there's kind of a law of silence, I guess, between surgeons. Even though Dr. Hull did complain to the administration, because the patient didn't die, and it was in the possible risk factors of the surgery of what he came out with, the pain and stiffness and everything he came out with, it basically was just kind of swept under the rug. He also operated on a man by the name of Barry Morgaloff, who owned a pool cleaning company. And he attempted to pull out his damaged disc, not with a scalpel, not just by touching it and popping it out with a scalpel, but a grab tool. He was literally lifting this guy off the table, trying to rip this disc out with a grab tool. All the time, Dr. Kirby screaming at him, please stop, I'll finish it, I'll do it, let me do it. And he came out with worse pain than he went in with. He had a history of drug abuse, Mr. Morgaloff. And so after all of that, when he came out of the surgery with worse pain than he had, he would ask the doctor for more pain pills, and he would basically tell him no, he was a drug seeker. He ended up in rehab and basically even reported that Dr. Duntsch looked like he was intoxicated. There was also a nurse that reported him just before he went into this surgery by saying that it looked like his hair was unkempt, he was on something, and his scrubs were dirty, and there was a hole in the back of his scrubs that he had noticed earlier in the week and mentioned it to him. So this guy was just a hot mess. And then we have Kelly Martin, who was undergoing a routine back operation. He cut through her spinal cord, severed an artery. She lost a lot of blood. He refused to give it up to a trauma surgeon, and he eventually said this surgery was a success. Miss Martin woke up from her anesthesia screaming in pain, clutching, clawing at her legs, begging for help. She ended up staying in the ICU until she eventually bled out from the damage that he had done. And then his old buddy, Jerry Sumners, who had moved from Memphis with him, was working as a marketing office in his clinic, came in for a simple vertebrae fusion. Again, one of those simple kinds of things. He botched him so badly, he ended up being a quadriplegic. So, yeah. But however, internal investigations at Baylor Plano revealed that he, on a couple of them, did meet the standard of care, but now after they have a death and now a quadriplegic, they're finally saying he doesn't meet the standard of care, and they invited him to leave. To avoid a lawsuit, they offered to write him a letter of recommendation, which I don't get, and to not report him to the National Practitioner Data Bank. So he was able to go on to Dallas Medical Center with basically a clean bill of employment, except for the many doctors that, said that he shouldn't be practicing. There, he basically butchered a couple of more patients, most egregiously, Miss Floella Brown, who only wanted to be able to pick up her grandchildren. She ended up dying from blood loss as a result of what he did to her, and permanent wheelchair bound for another patient there, Mary Uford. Just the same kind of incompetence. And again, the administrators at a Dallas Memorial just kind of, okay, he's a well-renowned surgeon. We just hired him. We don't want to get sued. And then after finally being forced out there by pressure from other doctors like Dr. Kirby, who had hospital privileges there as well, he went on to Southampton Community Hospital, as well as Legacy Surgery Center, to maim and kill more patients. And so it kept going on, and it was only when Dr. Kirby and a couple of other doctors decided to take matters into their own hands and reported him to the Medical Board of Texas. He first passed that inquisition, even though Kirby called him a sociopath. He doesn't even realize what he's doing, or he doesn't care. Finally, they were able to go to the DA's office and get the DA, an assistant DA there, to pick up a criminal case. And once they got involved, suddenly his Texas medical license is revoked. Duntsch fled after breaking up with Wendy and having an affair with a nurse practitioner. He moved to Denver to live with his parents, where he ended up declaring bankruptcy after debts of $1 million. He was arrested for a DUI in Denver and later taken to a psychiatric hospital in Dallas after returning to see his son, whom he and Wendy had. He was arrested in Dallas and put on trial in July of 2015, where he was charged with 6 felony counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and 5 counts of aggravated assault causing bodily injury and 1 of aggravated assault causing death. Many of the doctors that had accused him, as well as some of the patients, including Jerry Summers, testified against him, and he was eventually sentenced to life in prison for his crimes. And then there was a slew of civil suits filed by patients, and so right now he sits in prison with an anticipated release, possible parole date until July 2045, which he will essentially be 74 years old. So the sentence was 20 years to life. It'll be life for him before he even comes up for his first possible parole date. And now let's talk about the actual docuseries, Dr. Death. Wondery Media launched a podcast called Dr. Death, where their first 10 episodes focused on Dr. Duntsch. And from there, it was picked up by Peacock for a limited series. In fact, they picked up all of their episodes, and so that's the reason this Peacock series, which is produced, at least season 1 is, by Patrick McManus. He's a famous, documentarian TV producer, and season 2 is produced by yet another person. But it's so far it's a 2-season docuseries with the first 8 episodes. Season 1 focusing on Dr. Duntsch. All-star cast in these. Joshua Jackson from Dawson's Creek, for those of you that remember that show from the early 2000s, I was a fan. Or for those of us that go all the way back to the Mighty Ducks, he was in the Mighty Ducks as well. He plays the evil doctor, and he does it with such precision. I really believed he was Christopher Deutsch at many, many times. I mean, he played it to sociopathic perfection. Give him high regards. You had Grace Goomer as the nurse practitioner he had an affair with, who also tried to report him. Most beautifully, though, you have Christian Slater as Dr. Randall Kirby, who is just a slice of heaven in this docuseries. He's funny, he's to the point, and from what I understand, it's actually the attitude that Dr. Kirby had. Dr. Kirby wanted Duntsch to go down. He went after him, he kept after him, and many times, much of his testimony, you get the idea it was just kind of a dick measuring contest between the two doctors, but Randall Kirby had the bigger one. And thanks to him and Dr. Robert Henderson, who's played by Alec Baldwin, that's okay as long as they didn't have any guns on set. They were able to finally bring him down, not through the Texas medical system, or the American medical system, but through the DA. It took them actually going with everything that they had put together to a district attorney that had an interest in the case, because she felt empathy for the victims, took it up, and because of their interference, their entering into this case, the medical board actually finally took action and suspended his license. Why? How was this allowed to happen? Well, the show does a good job in breaking it down because of tort reform in Texas, because of other things. Malpractice insurance, like what you could actually earn on a case, is capped at $250,000. So because of that, you have a little bit of a loosey-goosey attitude toward malpractice. And basically, it boiled down to these hospital systems don't want to be sued. And so they don't want to break a contract with a surgeon, particularly any doctor, but a surgeon, especially a neurosurgeon, which neurosurgeons and plastic surgeons are the money makers of the medical world. They're elevated, like I said, to the level of gods. They didn't want to get sued or get on the bad side of a doctor that they might need to do a surgery for them one day. So they kept sweeping it under the rug. This is how killer nurses and killer doctors are able to sometimes carry on for years before anything is done, until the collateral damage sadly gets to the point that not reporting it is a bigger risk than reporting it. So that's kind of what happened here. And it really shakes your faith in the medical system. The show is excellent. I highly recommend it. It has a lot of facts in it. It is, some things are dramatized, of course, but for the most part, they stick to the research that I've done on Dr. Death. It's kind of straight line. And so I give it highly give it two thumbs up. You should definitely check it out. It's on Peacock. You can get a free version of Peacock as long as you're willing to watch the ads. You're good to go. I am watching season 2 as well, and I will report back to you on it as soon as I am able to research the actual case. So I hope you enjoyed this. They did a fine job, and until next time, Kito and Krime.